as Fan said, I'm a fellow of BCS. My day job is with IBM, where I'm a product manager and done various, I've been there for 25 years, I've done various roles there. I'm also a visiting lecturer at University of Warwick. I am pleased to write a regular column in the BCS magazine as well on Futurology. And it was one of those, it was about 2 or 3 issues ago that I wrote on this particular topic, and Fan decided to get me along tonight to talk to you guys about what I wrote about there. Again, if you've got any questions, online, please feel free to ask as we go through. Any questions for people in the room, then I'll repeat your questions into the microphone. Okay. So this session is all about proof and identity systems in the future there. Now, to the best of my knowledge, I've only been a victim of identity theft once, and it was probably about 15 years ago. I went out for a meal at a restaurant in Winchester, pizza, you know, it's all really nice. And I remember at the end of the meal giving my card over to the waiter, and the waiter took the card behind the bar, as used to happen like this, took my card away, came back with a silver plate with a receipt on it, I signed it, and then he took that away and then brought my card back. And that's kind of how it used to be. Thought nothing of it, of course, and then it was a few days later that I happened to be online, and I looked at credit card recent transactions, and I saw that there had been a transaction for £1 with Megabus, you know, the cheap bus company. And then I thought, oh, I didn't do that, so I phoned up, stopped the card out of precaution, and apparently what had happened was that those kind of really small transactions are quite indicative of fraud about to happen, because what fraudsters will sometimes do is try out the card to see if it works, and if it works, then do increasingly bigger transactions. And so I found out, and I realized that the only time I'd used my card recently was at this particular restaurant, and I figured out where it was. Obviously didn't have any proof, but that was my experience of identity fraud, and I'm sure you've got, you know, your own experiences. Now, since that time, the way that we handle cards, the way we handle payments has changed quite significantly. One of the core design principles of chip and PIN and contactless payments was that the card, the device you use to pay, not only never leaves your sight during the payment, but also you're holding it the entire time. Yeah, you don't hand your card over to anybody now. So that was what's one of the core design principles behind it. So things sort of have changed and changed for the better. But of course, we hear about identity theft a lot. We hear about fraud, and it can happen in quite unusual ways, or ways that you wouldn't really consider. So, for example, if I can, there we go. There's a little bit of a delay there. So just think about a basic example of going into a bar. Now, those of you who are lucky enough to look under 25 may be familiar relatively recently of being asked for ID in a bar. Yeah, it hasn't happened to me for quite a while, but let's pretend it has. Actually, last time it was in the US, where they are a lot more strict about these sorts of things, but never mind. So imagine somebody goes into a bar and says, and the bartender says, please, can you show me some ID? And so the person who's trying to get a drink hands over their ID. Oh, by the way, all but 2 or 3 of my pictures that I'm using today, I did generate using generative AI. So you might see bizarre fingers and hands and stuff everywhere, but these are 2 of them, which I thought turned out pretty well. Anyway, so the guy goes to the bar, wants a drink, hands over the ID, and then, you know what the scenario is like. Then the bartender can look at the ID and go, is this person over 18? Yes, I'll give him a drink. No, I won't. Because if you think about it in a little bit more detail, you think, well, what you're actually doing here is you're handing over an identity document to someone behind a bar, and what you're doing is you're revealing to the bartender a lot more than just the fact that you're over 18. You're revealing stuff like your name, your address, what you can drive, your date of birth. Even your date of birth isn't strictly necessary to prove to the other person that you're over 18. All you really need is a kind of a yes, no, is this person over 18 or not? And you might think, well, that's not really a problem. All I want to do is get a drink. So does it really matter if I'm handing over my driving license to a guy who works behind a bar? And you probably, right to think that. But then if you sort of take that problem a step further and you think about the majority of transactions that we do today are online, then we have this problem of oversharing information, sometimes deliberate, sometimes accidental. We often share things about ourselves that we didn't intend to do, and that's leading to quite significant cases of identity fraud. And I picked out some stats from the UK here. Identity fraud is quite significant. It's coming at around £4 billion pounds cost the economy each year. It is predicted to rise again this year for cost of living reasons and various other reasons as well. I think things like cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin are exacerbating the problem. The reason they're exacerbating the problem is because Bitcoin is a way of doing online payments in a way that is pretty much untraceable. It's we call it pseudonymous. So it is a quite big problem. Fraudscape is the national fraud database. So this is only recorded identity theft. So quite often people feel embarrassed. Sometimes people don't want to feel gullible, so they won't report it. But it's quite a significant problem in all major countries. The UK is no exception. Now, various types of fraud, and when we think about identity theft, we often think of it in the context of financial fraud. For example, £1 charges to Megabus, an increasing amount of money, and that is the most common approach, the most common type of identity theft that there is. But there are various other types as well. So, for example, you might hear about commercial identity theft. People's identities being used to endorse products that they didn't actually do so. Martin Lewis, money saving expert, was on the news recently talking about a deep fake that had been doing the rounds on the internet, where his face, his likeness, his voice was being used to advertise products he had nothing to do with. Deborah Meaden, the dragon from Dragon's Den as well, she often has similar problems of her likeness identifying and endorsing products that she has got nothing to do with. And it can happen at the personal level as well. You don't need to be famous in order for that to happen. Qualification is a huge market in fake degrees. Over the last 5 years, the UK government has closed down 85 websites online selling degrees, fake degrees from universities. Again, it's a massive problem. And again, in the US, it is even worse. Medical information, often used to claim NHS treatment or to claim drugs. So 95% of all medical identity theft is done using medical records. So keep your medical records safe. And finally, something that is particularly relevant right now is disinformation. Media footage purporting to be from one organization or from one person, when in actual fact it's not. And if you've been a victim of identity theft, then things being posted in your name can have significant problems, not only for your followers on social media, but also more widely. So there's quite a lot of instances and types of identity theft that we see there. So what can we do about it? So one of the concepts, this is obviously British Computer Society, so we're going to talk a bit more about the technology behind how we try and solve that problem tonight. So one of the concepts that I'm going to talk about is something called zero knowledge proofs. Now, zero knowledge proofs have been around for quite a while. They date back to 1985. There was a paper, that name I can't remember, by three researchers, two from MIT and one from the University of Toronto, where they talked from a very mathematical point of view about algorithms that we can use to try and prevent information flowing that doesn't need to flow. Okay. Now it does get very, very mathematical. It goes into loads of set theory and stuff like that, which I'm not going to get into today. But then, trust me, it gets deeply technical, deeply quickly. So what is zero knowledge proof? So it's an algorithm. So it doesn't have to be. It's not a single zero knowledge proof algorithm. It's one of a set of algorithms where one party can reveal to another party that a fact is true without, and here's the key thing, revealing any other information at all. Okay, so in the case of here, imagine there was an algorithm where this guy could say, I'm over 18, you don't need to know any more than that. And this guy is convinced. Okay, that's what the algorithms say. Now, 3 properties of a zero knowledge proof algorithm that needs to exist in order for it to be truly zero knowledge. Now, the first one is called completeness. That means if the statement is true, so this guy is saying something that is correct, then this guy, the verifier, will believe it. Okay? That's property 1. Property 2 is what we call soundness. And soundness says that if this guy's lying, then nothing he can say can convince the verifier. The third one is zero knowledge, which is the verifier learns nothing other than the truth of the fact that you're trying to prove. Right? Absolutely nothing. And so when you look at zero knowledge proof algorithms, then you need to apply those 3 tests. And if those tests apply, then it's zero knowledge. If not, then it isn't. Now you might be thinking, what does that actually mean? We've got any kind of examples that I can use? Funny that. Let's go for some examples. So the first example I'm going to give you is based on, hang on, here, is this one. Where's Wally? So, what can we do with zero knowledge and where's Wally? I would like to prove to you, well, let's say I wanted to prove to you that I knew, okay, give a picture. I'm trying to find Wally now. Okay, let's say I wanted to prove to you that I know where Wally is in this picture. How can I do it without revealing to you where Wally is? I don't think of a way I could do that. Right, so let me tell you, because we've got 200 more slides to get through. So the way you do it, and it's not a perfect algorithm, and I'll explain why. What you need is a sheet of paper. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing here, so I won't waste their whole flip chart. But what you do is you take a sheet of paper that's at least double the size of the book, and it has to be at least double the size of the book, and you make a small hole in it, a little hole, about the size of Wally. And then when you're not looking, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down here, I'm going to put the book over where Wally is, and then I'm going to invite you back, and you can then look at the little bit of Wally. Now, because this is twice the size of the book, you're not going to see the outline where the book is. You don't know where it is, where I've got it. But what you will be able to see is Wally. Yeah? So that's an example of a zero knowledge proof. Now, it's not a perfect example. It's not perfect for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it's not perfect because you can see the pose that Wally is making. So you know, I've given you some additional information that you wouldn't otherwise know. You'll know if he's holding something, or you'll learn something more about it. But also, unless you gave me the picture in the first place, I could be lying. I could have taken another picture of Wally and slid it underneath there, or I could have turned to a different page. So it's not a perfect algorithm, but you kind of get the general idea about how that works. So that's there we go. I need another prop. I have got a red ball and a green ball. Okay, a red ball and a green ball. Is anyone here colorblind? You might yeah. For those of you, if you are colourblind, I'll point out now that these are both grey balls, right? They're not red and green. So I'm not trying to trick you. But this is kind of the point. You were colourblind. How could I convince you that I have a red ball and a green ball? Right? Again, this is I want to do that in zero knowledge. I'm not going to tell you which is red and which is green. I want to prove to you that you, being the colourblind person, which of these is red and which of these is green, or that they are red and green. And I'm not trying to, scam you with the fact that it's actually they're both grey. So the way you do it is, now I'm going to be the colourblind person. I'm going to take the two balls from me, and I would put them behind my back, me as a colourblind person, and I would switch those balls around, or not. And then what I'd do is I'd go back to the person who's trying to convince me, and I would say, did I switch? And then I would say, yes, you did switch. Now the red ball's on the left and green ball's on the right. And then, okay. And then the prover, the one who's trying to prove it, may have got that right. Hopefully he did get that right. One of two things will have happened. Either it was a lucky guess, or there really is a red ball and a green ball. So yeah, it's a 50% chance of getting it right. So then what does the verifier do? The colourblind person then will go, try again. Right, did I switch this time? And again, the prover will say, well, yes, you did. You switched again. Great. So now I've got it right twice. So that's less likely that I'm trying to scam you. And what you can do is you can do it multiple times until at such point that the verifier, the colourblind person, is convinced that actually you've got it right 100 times in a row. Therefore, I'm pretty sure that there's a red ball and a green ball because you didn't know whether or not I switched behind my back. Yeah, makes sense? Yeah, good. So again, that's a zero knowledge proof. And it makes the assumption that there's no other difference between the two balls other than the fact that they're red and the green. Because if there's another marking on the ball or some other way of me telling, then it wouldn't be true zero knowledge and I could still be trying to scam you. Good, right, I'll do one more. So this one takes a bit more, I've got a prop for this one, so you have to bear with me. This is a great picture that was generated by AI of Halloween, which is fine up until the point where you look at the little boy's finger and you can see that it's not entirely correct. But no, that's pretty good. Okay, right. How are we going to explain this one? These are two people, two children. Let's call them Alice and Bob for the sake of consistency with other algorithmic descriptions. They've both been out trick-or-treating. Now, what they want to find out is, have they got the same number of sweets? And they want to do it in such a way that they're not going to reveal anything other than the fact of, was it the same number? So neither of them want to figure out whether they've got more than the other or the exact number of sweets. All they want to do is have some indication of the fact of, is it the same? Have we got the same number of sweets? Right, how are we going to do that? So let's do that in a zero knowledge way. Well, the way you do it in zero knowledge, and again, you have to sort of follow along with me on this one because I haven't got, as will become obvious very quickly why I haven't got a prop for this. What you get is Bob goes away and gets 100 boxes for the sake of argument. And these are 100 boxes with 100 keys, all different keys, 100 boxes. So we've got a box here, and they're all going to be labeled as well. So we've got a box here with 0 written on it, a box here with 1 written on it, a box with 2, so on, up to 99. We'll assume more than 99 sweets is just going to lead to sickness. Then what Bob does is he looks at all the keys, he takes all the keys out, and he throws all the keys away in their locked state. So he can't open any of the boxes, apart from one box. And that's the box that corresponds to the number of sweets that he has, because he knows that information. Let's say he's got 36 sweets. He keeps the key to box number with 36 written on it. Right? With me so far? Yeah, then he goes away, leaves the room. Alice comes in. She sees 100 boxes. She doesn't know which Bob's is because none of them have got keys in. Bob's still got that one key for 36, but Alice doesn't know that. They're all locked boxes. But she does have 100 sheets of paper. What she does, on 99 of those sheets, she draws a cross. On the 100th sheet, she draws a tick. And what she does is she slides into each of the boxes a single piece of paper on each one. Every single box she puts in a piece of paper. Now, the box that has got her number written on it, she puts the tick. Still with me? She slides it into these locked boxes. Good. She leaves. I'll get there in the end. You haven't got any, I've got a meeting in June. All right. Bob comes back. Now what Bob does, he's got his key. He goes and unlocks his box with the 36 written on it, opens the box, takes out a sheet of paper, because we know that a sheet of paper has been inserted into a box, and there'll either be a tick or a cross on it. If it's a tick, he knows that they've got the same number of sweets. If it's a cross, more likely, then he knows there is. And he can show that piece of paper now to Alice. Alice and Bob both know that they've got the same or different number of sweets and no other information. Good. See? Excellent, excellent. That's good. And that is it's a quite good zero knowledge proof because no other information has been revealed to Alice or to Bob. They don't know anything other than the fact that they've got the same number of sweets. Excellent. Good, good. And even though that is a completely impractical example, you could imagine how in computing terms you could implement that kind of thing using cryptography and that kind of thing. Good. Right, let's move on. Let's go and apply that back to the bar. Go back to where we came in on this. You may be thinking, how's zero knowledge going to work if you're in a bar situation? And you'd be right to think that because nothing this guy can say can convince this guy that he's over 18 using zero knowledge. This guy's not going to trust him. It's like, yeah, I can prove to you I'm over 18, but on zero knowledge, I'm over 18. It's not going to work. Practical examples need something else. Just having it zero knowledge is not enough. So what we need in realistic scenarios is something called issuers. Trusted authorities that the verifiers are happy to use. So if I go back to the very first example where he showed the driving license, the issuer in that example is the DVSA. I still refer to it as DVLA, but right, it's the driving authority. And the point is that the prover, the person who's doing the proof, isn't always the person who's holding the identity. This guy doesn't need to do the proof, the holder of the ID. The proof is actually with the issuer. The issuer, so this guy needs to go to the issuer and say, look, this guy's saying he's over 18. Is that true? Is he actually over 18 or is he not? And it's an interaction between the verifier and the issuer that says whether or not the person is over 18. Now, how is the issuer going to know that the holder is the one that we're referring to here? Well, there still needs to be some kind of interaction between the holder and the issuer in order to prove who he is. But that information, who this guy is, does not need to be revealed to the verifier. If you're doing it in a true zero knowledge way, the issuer and the verifier is going to be a simple interaction that says, yes, that person's over 18. Not even, yes, he's over 18. Right? It needs to be a pure interaction between the issuer and the verifier. Now, look at the exchange of what's going on there. So we have three users, for want of a better term, that we're talking about here, three actors in the system. We've got the DVSA, we've got the holder, and we've got the verifier. So the flow that would take place is that at some point in the past, the holder, that's me, Matt, will have got some credentials. We'll have got some kind of identity document from the DVSA. That's my driving license. And then when I want to prove my age, I would go to the DVSA in an online way and say, look, I need to prove my age here. please could you generate me a proof that I'm over 18? Then the DVSA, the issuer, would then come back saying, yes, the holder is over 18, and that's the thing that I would present back to the verifier. It's quite a simple exchange. The question now that would obviously be, can you think of an example of where this happens now, where this has happened? Can you think of an example recently?
Police checking car identity.
It could do. I'm not sure that happened. I think it's a bit more low tech than that. The one I'm thinking of, the NHS COVID pass. Trying to get into a venue a year or so ago, what you would do is you'd turn up at the venue and they'd ask for proof of vaccination. And you would have an app on your phone that would contain a QR code. You'd show the QR code to the person who's letting you into the venue, and they would scan that code and let you in. Yeah, and that's basically the scenario that we had on the previous chart. Yeah. Now, has anyone got any observations over the efficacy of this particular approach? Did it work in your experience, or was it? Your battery's running low, my friend.
I'll give my
Yeah, go on.
Actually had a lot more information than what the person has.
There was a lot more information that was revealed. That's true. I would also argue. Oh, let's go away. Fantastic. Good. Yeah. If everything all fails, we can go to plan C, plan D. That's fine. Yes, there were also problems of what are the problems? I say people generating the IDs ahead of time. I think was probably one of the biggest ones. I heard reports from various news sources about people generating a COVID pass, printing it onto a sheet of paper, and then handing out the same sheet of paper to their friends and getting them all into a venue. So
you can screenshot this and then what that out.
Yeah, you could absolutely. And also, I think the other problem that I would observe is how much if you're a venue organizer and you've got to get 20,000 people into an arena, how close you're going to look at individual passes as well, which sort of makes the problem even worse. So there is a way of sorting at least some of those problems. So, for example, the problem of generating the proofs ahead of time and having a single COVID pass, you can do something called cryptographic challenges. And this is where you just add another step to the process to say, if you want a proof of a particular fact, then what you do, the verifier says, please could you make me a proof, but it's a one-time proof. And by one time, I mean, I want you to incorporate this random element into the proof that you send me. So, maybe it has to contain the number of 19, maybe the issuer needs to talk like a pirate or something. It doesn't really matter what it is. The verifier could request that the proof that comes back has a particular nuance to it. And so then the same flow happens, which is the verifier goes to the holder, says, please, can you generate me a proof that contains random element X? The holder goes to the issuer and says, yep, generate me a proof that I'm over 18, but you must incorporate this additional piece of information that's just a random number. Then the proof is generated that includes that random element, and that's the thing that I show to the verifier. Again, there are a few potential issues. Now, that's one way that you can do it if you wanted it to be developed there and then, if you wanted the proof to be gained there and then. So that solves some of the problems. I can see there's probably at least 3 problems with that. And there's probably a problem with the issuer. There's the issue of trust here, I think, with the issuer. Does the verifier trust the issuer? I mean, if I'm showing my driving license, he could probably trust that. But what if the issuer was your friend? Someone that you met down the pub. It doesn't necessarily mean that the verifier is going to trust what you say. There's a problem with the holder. in that, well, what if I have been a victim of identity theft, and what if Matt isn't really Matt, but it's actually somebody else? So you could that could potentially be a problem as well. And of course there is the same problem as before with verifiers, which is what's the motivation of the verifier to check, really? The incentives really do need to line up. So how are we going to solve that problem? Yes, so there's a question there about you can never reach 100% accuracy. Well, exactly. It depends on the algorithm. And a good example of that would be the holding the balls, right? Because that you're never going to achieve 100% accuracy. But you get it to a certain level that you've convinced the prover. You convinced the verifier. So let's go all the way back. Let's go all the way back to basics here about what we need from identity systems and what we need from proof systems in order to at least be able to understand where the problems lie, even if we can't get to a full solution. So think about the elements of you that we have to play with in this particular world. Well, there are three categories. There's the things that identify you as a person, the things that are intrinsic to you. So that could be your DNA, it could be your voice, it could be some particular fingerprint or eyeball scan or retina scan type thing, things that constitute you. So that's quite good when it comes to identity systems, because they're things that are, in most cases, difficult to fake. But with voice, I know that we can debate that. There's also things that you have, things that have been given to you by, for example, a trusted authority, like your driving license, like your passport, keys to your house. They're all elements, they're all things that you have that could be used to prove who you are. The final thing are things that you know, and we have lots of examples of those. Your user ID and password are things that you know, and answers to questions that maybe like your mother's maiden name or whatever, your PIN numbers, your ancestry. These are all other pieces of information that maybe on their own are quite don't really tell that much about you, but if you had a number of these things, it could give you a decent amount of certainty that you are who you say you are. So the question I have on the back of all this sort of information is, who owns that information? Now, the logical answer, of course, would be you do. But I would argue that in today's world, we are not really, it doesn't really work out like that. If I want to register for a website or log on to online banking, this information, the secrets that I know, are stored somewhere on the bank's servers. I don't actually own them. I don't store them. I don't manage them. So it represents a problem for identity systems, and that's what's causing identity theft. I don't have this information. I don't own it. I'm not in control of it. So there's various things that people have done, that systems have done in order to try and solve some of those problems, to some level of success, and we're not there yet in terms of truly solving that problem. You might find that when you register for a lot of online services nowadays, you don't create a new user ID and password in order to log on to that service. What you do instead is you log on using your Google account or your Apple account or your Facebook account or whatever. So you don't have a plethora of user IDs and passwords that you can lose. You just have one that you can lose and then lose access to everything. But it does. You can see why that problem's going. Why that comes about. It means that the site that you're registering with doesn't need to bother with trying to store that information. They don't have any of those. Probably don't have any of those GDPR problems or anything to do with data breaches, because they've delegated the responsibility for owning that data to someone else. There have also been systems that are explicitly set up to try and alleviate the problem. There's something called OpenID, which is a service you can use that is only there to store identity. On the basis that if you log on to a site using your Facebook account, guess what? That's giving Facebook a lot more information about you than it has now to monetize things for Google. For those problems. So it sort of solves that problem. And there is another emerging system as well called self-sovereign identity that I want to talk a little bit about, where it's a bit like OpenID in that it's a service that you could use to contain this information. But at the heart of self-sovereign identity, the name self-sovereign means that it's owned and managed by you. Now, it is very, very early days, and I'll talk a bit about some of the scenarios behind this in a little while, but there are really three concepts to get across when understanding what I mean by self-sovereign identity. The first concept is this idea of what we call a decentralized identifier. It's often called a DID, which is a user-owned, user-managed identity, and it is fully under the control of a person, institution, or thing. So you would have a DID. And crucially, it wouldn't be stored in a single place where you could use it. It would be decentralized in a way that you have access to it, and it isn't stored in one place, that represents a honeypot for hackers. It uses standard public key infrastructure in order to resolve and verify these IDs, all the standard stuff that we use for talking over the internet. But that's the first concept. The second concept is what we call a verifiable credential. And the best way of describing that is it's a fact. It's a thing. It's a fact about an ID. So a verifiable credential could be anything to do with that ID. It could be my name. It could be my age. It could be my date of birth. It could be the fact that I've got a degree or whatever. It's a fact related to that thing. And guess what? It's going to use zero knowledge and the covers and various other technologies as well, but I won't go into a huge amount of detail today. As I said before, we also make use of standard key management as well in order to, for example, like signing, in order to match credentials to IDs. Great, you might think, well, give me an example. So this is what it would generally look like. Again, as before, we have an issuer, we have a holder, and we have a verifier. Those are the key actors that we mentioned before. And what happens is that you have a set of IDs that are, I won't go into huge detail here about where these are stored, but think of it as a bit ephemeral, sort of in cloudy sort of terminology here, in a sort of a federated repository. And that ID is owned by each of the actors. So an issuer would have an ID, a holder would have an ID, a verifier would have an ID. And you've got this idea of facts. And so what happens is that these facts can be assigned to a particular ID. And the issuer, so for example, the DVSA, would issue a fact against a particular ID and would sign cryptographically that fact and associate it with the ID. Now the holder needs to agree to that. So the holder would also issue, having been issued one of these credentials, would then countersign it. So it's been agreed by both the issuer and the holder that this fact is true. And then if you wanted to verify something about yourself, you would present purely that fact and no other fact to the verifier, and the verifier would be able to, using the same technology, to figure out whether or not it's true. So it's all uses zero knowledge. Let's give that in terms of an example. Let's say I was a doctor and I was looking to get a job at a hospital. What I would do, I'd have an ID that represented me. There's no information in that other than the fact it's me. Think about cryptographic signatures, certificates and things when you deal with stuff online. You know something is yours, but because you have the means to unlock it, if you're familiar with public key cryptography. But I have some kind of identity here. And what happens at the point I become a doctor is the university issues a verifiable credential against that particular ID. So they would sign that that VC that says that I am now a doctor. I would agree to that, obviously, I've got my degree. I would countersign that verifiable credential that proves I'm a doctor, and then in the event of me wanting to get a job at a hospital, all I need to present in a zero knowledge way is just that verifiable credential, that fact that's about me to the hospital that will give the hospital enough information to prove that I'm a doctor, but nothing else. Okay. Now, the thing about these is that these are all IDs that can take different roles. There's not the sense of, well, a university is simply an issuer or a hospital is simply a verifier. Different people can have different roles at different times. So, for example, the hospital itself could be an issuer. Let's take it one step forward. That the doctor wants to get a bank account. And in order to get a special rate on their bank account, they need to prove that they are actually a doctor or they have a job. So what happens in this case is the hospital can issue a verifiable credential to say, well, actually, this doctor, it works for us. It's another fact against the doctor. So the hospital signs it. The doctor will countersign it because it's their ID. They're in control of it. And then that, as a verifiable credential, is then passed to the bank that says, well, yep, you've definitely got a job because it's been countersigned by the hospital and you. And so you get the general idea. And it can be complex as well, if you wish. So, for example, you might want to say that if you wanted to get a particular bank account, you wanted to tell them two things. You wanted to tell them your name, and you wanted to tell them the fact that you have a job as a doctor. Then there might be two pieces of information that you need to share, depending on the situation. So in this case, the name comes from some government entity. The hospital gives another piece of information. Both of those two facts will be given to the doctor and ultimately onto the bank to prove that not only are they what their name is, but also the fact that they're a doctor. And you can see how zero knowledge can be used to do that. Now, this is quite I said it's quite early, but it's also quite a powerful example of where these things could be used in the future. So, for example, when I talked before about fake degrees, you can imagine this could go some way to helping solve that particular problem of fake degrees. Because what a verifier could do is go look at the fact and say, well, that's actually signed by the University of Oxford. You know, I'm going to kind of agree with that. There are various other use cases as well that have been doing the rounds. There was a 2014 paper by Princeton, some researchers from Princeton University, that came up with a zero knowledge proof for nuclear disarmament. And the challenge here is that countries want to prove that they have been disarming their nuclear facilities, but at the same time not revealing any confidential secrets about them. Okay? So there's a zero knowledge algorithm that makes use of this kind of stuff to do that. I'm not entirely sure why when I asked Dali, I think it was, to create me an image of proof of nuclear disarmament, decided to come up with a dove, but you know, that's what. Environmental, social governance, reporting, so organizations have to do an increasing amount of reporting now related to their sustainability goals. And again, there's a desire amongst many organizations to be able to prove that they are being sustainable without revealing any intellectual property related to them. So again, you can do some zero knowledge stuff for ethical ESG reporting. The final one's interesting: online misinformation. So one of the algorithms that I saw on this is about the ability to take a piece of news footage and to sign it by a particular news organization who can attest to the veracity of it, to attest where that came from. So you can imagine, for example, in some war zone, taking some video footage and having the camera that was used to take the footage sign it, for example, on behalf of the BBC. And then what happens is when it gets disseminated, that sort of meta information is embedded within the footage itself, so that you as a viewer of that information can say, I'm willing to trust the BBC, and therefore it's been signed by the BBC. And what you can do is you can do various hashes and things of the video footage as well to ensure that it's then not tampered with after the fact. But you know that the video with that particular hash is from the BBC. So that can be used to solve the misinformation problem. And from a technological point, absolutely can. Now, the reason I put here that it doesn't go towards solving the problem of disinformation is that if people are willing to do this or are not willing to either trust the BBC or they just want to put out any old stuff and say it's from somewhere else, that's not going to stop doing. It's not going to change people's opinions. And that really leads me to my final point that I wanted to make here. That everything that I've talked about today, I'll apologise, I should have given a warning before I put this picture up. Yeah. If you read the news about it today, side point. Anyway, everything I've talked about today we've been talking about the technology related to zero knowledge proofs. Now, I am always wary about extolling the virtues of technology to solving problems that aren't technology related. So I'm always wary, particularly of social or political problems. And I never claim that any technology is going to solve those problems. And so we're talking here about cryptographically backed proof. Don't confuse proof and trust. Now, I'm not making a political point here. I'm going to stay clear of that. But if Brexit and Trump have taught me one thing, it's that you can prove stuff till you're blue in the face. It doesn't necessarily mean that people will trust you. Okay. So, and I think that's an important point. I'll give an example. Let's say I could come up with technology that uses this kind of stuff that we've talked about today to solve electronic voting. I could absolutely do that. And there are electronic voting systems out there that can ensure that votes can only be cast once, that an independent observer or indeed anybody could go in and see the votes that were cast and were correctly cast. It's not going to stop guys like this. And also it's not going to stop, for example, somebody who has grown up with a general distrust of anything computer related. Now, let's say you had I don't know any of your grandmothers or whatever, right? But if your 80-year-old gran doesn't trust computers and wants to write everything down on a bit of paper and get a piece of paper or go into the voting booth and like physically with a thing and put it in the box, nothing you can say is going to change that. I remember spending years trying to teach my mum how to use teletext, and that was just never going to happen. So my point is that we're talking here about a technological solution. Do be careful of problems are not always technical problems, right? Social problems, political problems, something else completely. Good. Well, I'm sort of getting to the end now. I hope you found that useful. There is, as I say, there is a lot that we can talk about in relation to zero knowledge proof and identity systems and all that. And what I've tried to do is steer clear of the mathematics, the set theory behind it, because I think that in many ways that's sort of unhelpful. There's a lot more information around if you want to go and look upon this stuff. As I say, I'm fortunate enough to write an article every issue for BCS magazine, and I wrote one a little while ago on this topic. So do go look that up if you want to see that any further. Are there any questions? Yeah, go for it.
You have an example where you were doing the self-sovereign.
Yeah.
And you had university signs to see a doctor and it goes through to hospital.
Mm.
Given that effectively the person has that signed,
Mhm.
how then do you go about discrediting it?
How do you go about discrediting credentials that have once been signed, that are now no longer signed? It's no different, actually, to the way we deal with that in the web today. So in today, if I've got a certificate that's used to verify, for example, the identity of my bank when I log on and I see the padlock inside the web browser, we have what's called certificate revocation lists that can revoke certificates that get pushed down. That involves all things like a chain of trust up to a root certificate and all those kind of things as well. But there are techniques for enabling a fake thing or things that have been compromised in some way, they can be revoked. Yeah, and you can put expiry on certificates and that kind of.
What method is currently being used in some of the US states for a driving license? But they are doing something very similar where the police can ask if you've got the license, and it will say you have got a license. It doesn't need to give any more information to the police officer.
Yes, so yeah, you're pointing out the fact that in various US states they have similar technologies. There are various different places now, as with the US. There are very few things that are at the federal level. It generally gets done at the state level. So there are different technologies in use in different places. So, for example, IBM, we did I don't know the state of it now. We did some work with New York State around their COVID pass.
I think about the driving license.
But it's a kind of similar idea. I don't know specifically what technology that they use.
Based on having an Apple phone.
Based on Apple phone, yes. I've heard that various systems do require particular walled gardens in order to work, but there are different ways of doing it. And as with the fact that there are lots of different zero knowledge algorithms, a lot of them in the past have been based on technology around blockchain, right? But again, it's sort of some do, some don't, depending on the actual situation there. And as with a lot of these things, the technology is evolving as well, because I think the need is certainly there, and there's a lot of research, a lot of innovation that's going on in this sector as well. Okay, yeah, question.
You just mentioned that. I felt there's a similarity between the idea of the blockchain was the decentralized and rely on.
Yeah. Sorry.
Tell me verify that.
Yeah, cover that. Yeah, so the observation there was about the use of DIDs and using blockchain as a potential one. So I spent 8 years as blockchain enablement lead for IBM, so a lot of this work was sort of very familiar to me. You're right. In the some of the example implementations that I've seen of digital identity use blockchain to do that. A good one is called Sovereign, SOVRIN. That is an example of a digital identity solution that uses a blockchain in order to do that. Again, I think when we're talking at the conceptual level, I didn't want to mandate any one particular style, and blockchain is one of those divisive things that is either going to be the future or it's going to go nowhere or whatever. I think it's a pretty decent use case if done correctly. Okay, any other questions? Any questions on the chat as well? Is that all right? Okay. Can zero knowledge be used against RGN attacks? Random number.
Question. And is that it can be used secure against RGN attacks?
I assume that means random number. Is that RGN?
I believe so.
Okay.
And where the security chain can reach at that level.
Yes, that's probably more detail than we should probably go into today. But let's have a chat. Have a chat about that afterwards. If you drop me an email.